Hello and welcome to Texadia Systems educational video series. By the end of this video, you should be able to do the following: properly prepare and terminate a proper solder joint, and prevent cold solder joints. Before you begin, you will need the following items: a soldering iron, wet sponge or wire mesh tip cleaner, lead-free rosin core solder, a clean and clutter-free work area. Start by setting up your soldering station in an area that is free of clutter and debris. If you are working with a butane soldering iron, ensure that your area is free from sawdust and other flammable materials. Your soldering iron should produce 40 to 60 watts. If you have a thermostatically controlled soldering iron, set your temperature to approximately 350 degrees Celsius. Because of the wide variety of manufacturers and types, it is important to ensure that you are using the proper type of solder. The solder itself being used should be lead-free and contain a rosin flux core. A rosin flux core is designed to improve electrical contact and mechanical strength within the solder joint for electronics and electrical components. Acid flux core is used for plumbing and should not be used to solder any electronics or wires. Also, if you are using a lead-based solder, ensure you are in an area with adequate ventilation. Lead fumes are toxic and should be avoided at all costs. The composite or tin to lead ratio is usually listed on the label of the solder with the percentage of tin listed first. Let's start by preparing the tip of your iron by tinning it with some solder. Heat up your iron and apply a small amount of solder around the tip until it is covered. After the tip is covered with solder, turn off the iron and let it cool completely. Once the tip has cooled, you may turn it back on and let it heat up again. This method of tinning the iron will help to create consistent results in your soldering applications. If you haven't done so already, prepare your iron now before you begin. Use a wire mesh cleaner or a wet sponge to remove any grime or dirt from the tip. Never use a knife or sandpaper to clean the tip of your soldering iron, as this will remove the protective outer layer from the tip, allowing dirt and grime to build up as well as causing other performance issues. Prepare the cable to be soldered by stripping back the outer jacketing to expose the inner wires. Prepare any grounding wires with heat shrink. Only use butane torches or heat guns to apply heat shrink tubing. Do not use a lighter, as it will scorch and discolor the tubing. Tin the end of the wires with a small amount of solder, but ensure that it flows completely throughout the strands. This will hold the wires in place and prevent them from bird caging when applying heat. Bird caging is a result of the inner and outer strands separating from the inner core. It is caused when the application of extreme heat warps the metal strands, causing them to splay apart. Bird caging makes it difficult to land the wire in the spoon. It also creates the potential to cause shorts in the connection. If you witness your wire strands bird caging while trying to sink them into the solder joint, stop and begin the process over again. Heat the spoon from the underside and let the solder run into the heated spoon. Refrain from pushing the iron into the spoon if it can be helped. The tip most likely contains many impurities and contaminants within the flux that could cause the solder to set improperly. Cold solder joints may or may not carry the signal and are very difficult to troubleshoot. Do your best to prevent cold solder joints at all costs. Use the wire mesh tip cleaner or sponge often when you work, and do your best to prevent any contaminants from entering the flux while soldering your connections. After the wire has been tinned and you have prepared the connector by flooding the spoon with solder, push the tinned wire into the spoon while the solder is still hot. and hold it there until the solder has cooled. The cable jacketing should sit as close to the spoon as possible, if not touching the edge of the solder. The finished product should be shiny in appearance. If the solder joint appears dull and gray, then you'll need to start over and reapply. Remember that all soldered connections should have a shiny luster to their appearance when completed properly. Do your best to prevent stray strands from touching other leads, causing a short. Do not be afraid to start over if it isn't right. We are counting on you, the technician, to make sure your work measures up to this standard. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you next time.